Hi, I'm Sheri with Circle Studio and welcome to week 1 of the Leaf Peepers Quilt Along. Leah and I are really excited that you're with us and we can't wait to get started. When we were designing these blocks, we were really inspired by fall and all of the colorful leaves and changes that take place. So it was natural that I really wanted to, when I was picking out fabric, replicate that ombre or gradient effect. So here are the fabrics that I'm going to be using in this quilt along. I'm super excited and we'll dig in. First thing I did was I took on the material sheet, which has all the material requirements, I glued down a fabric swatch of which color I was going to use in which place. And what I did was just starting with A through I, again, just kind of picked what might be a good, really good gradient or sort of transition of colors. Although I did that, any kind of color scheme you can work with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a gradient or ombre effect. And then W is your background. And I'm going to stick with sort of a white, although it has sort of these goldish, warmish tones in it, which I thought would complement the color palette really, really well. So this is a great tool. I just glued mine down. You can tape them down, however you can get them stuck to the piece of paper. It's a really good reference tool as we're working through the weeks to go back and see which color is which. The other thing that I like to do is, before I dig into cutting the fabrics, just to keep organized, is I like to take a scrap piece of paper and just pin to the fabrics I'm going to be using that same alphabet number, the same organization number. Again, it really saves me from, as I'm going down the cutting list, from kind of messing up of cutting the wrong color. So next step is cutting, and I'll show you a couple of tips or just things to follow along with. Page 2 is everything that you'll need to cut for this pattern. So let me show you. There's a lot of pieces to cut, and one of the tools that we have in this pattern is a handy dandy cutting sheet. So pages 14 and 15, you'll notice some suggested cutting layout diagrams for the background fabric and then each of the color fabric A through I. Again, you can cut it any way that makes sense to you, but we wanted to include this in case people were feeling sort of challenged by making the best use of their fabric. So what I like to do is, I'm just going to remove my indicator. I recommend starting with the biggest pieces first. You may find by cutting the big pieces, you might be left over with some scraps. That'll be really great for the smaller pieces. Again, everyone's width, it might be slightly different of their fabric. We're basing this off of a 40-inch width of fabric. So I'm going to go to my first column in my diagram, and I'm just going to cut a strip. So I always cut strips first, and that strip is, let's see, if I look at my largest one, WHST2 is 7.5 inches wide. And what I'll do is I'll take, excuse me, and just cut my 7.5 inch wide strip first. I'm just going to make sure everything is squared up. I'll cut that strip. You'll notice on the diagram that below there's some smaller pieces, but you could see on the diagram if I just cut that 7.5 inch, there'll be a little bit of scrap for the others, but it'll be just a clean cut, and that way you're not wrestling with cutting little pieces. Again, cutting strips first really, really helps. So I'll do a little cut. I'm going to cut a strip. Put this away. I'm going to keep my label with it. It's pretty obvious that it's the background white, but I'll just keep that with it. And then let me just square this up, this 7.5 inches. If I was doing this not on camera, I probably, instead of being courageous and flipping it over, it does look like it stayed pretty square, I would walk around the table. I'm right-handed, so I always want to make sure, obviously, that cutting surface is on the right-hand side. But I'm not right now. I can't walk around the table, so I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to square up that 7.5. have 7.5 inches wide. I'll open this up. And now I'm going to square up to make that first 7.5 by 7.5 inch square. One thing I notice is, especially for this, there's a lot of cutting to begin with, and I wind up getting a blister right here. I don't know if any of you do that. I found that you can use any kind of glove, but my husband's old biking glove helps with that, and I don't get a blister there. So when I'm doing a lot of cutting, I'll use that. And I think I like about this is I still have my fingers free to do stuff. Okay. Again, if I was not doing this on camera and I could walk around the other side of the table, I would have left it and then just walked around versus flipping it around. And I'll just square that up to 7.5 inches. Great. And then I have, according to my diagram, WHST2, there's actually 2 of them. So I'll move that down and cut another 7.5 inch square. Again, all of this is in the diagram and the cutting instructions. Okay. So then, next below, I have my WHST1. I'll cut those next. And those, according to this, again, if I go to the cutting directions, are 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So what I can do then is just cut a 3.5 inch strip and then a 3.5 inch strip. There'll be 2 of them. You'll have a little bit of extra, and then just keep cutting those along. And then you have your first strip done, or your first few pieces done. So continue along that way. What I like to do is once they're cut, again, labeling and organization is key for this, this pattern. So what I do is I write down on little slips of paper, I have my WHST2. I have 2 pieces here, and then I'll either use a Wonder Clip to clip those together. You can use safety pins or just regular old straight pins and keep those together. And then I could just set those aside, and then you'll continue on for all of that. Again, organization is key, and then once I have something cut, I'll go on to my list and just put a little check mark on it, and that way I know it's done. So you'll continue on with that with all of your fabric. You're going to get everything organized. I'll also then make sure everything is coordinated with my swatches. Label. So this week I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut all of my fabric out, and then next week I'll be ready to piece together that first block. Let's make something awesome together.